Impulsando Parques para el Futuro. Es maestro en Ciencias en Políticas Públicas y Administración de la Universidad Carnegie Mellon. Y es candidato al doctorado en el Programa de Planeación Urbana y Regional en la Universidad de Michigan. Ha trabajado los últimos 25 años en el gobierno, con la comunidad, el sector privado y la academia, incluyendo el Departamento de Justicia de los Estados Unidos. Escritor y conferencista, también participa en varios consejos nacionales y locales, como The Change Lab Solutions, del cual es presidente. Fue nombrado director inaugural de Race, Equity and Leadership, REAL, en la Liga Nacional de Ciudades. Y actualmente es presidente del Consejo de Administración de la Asociación Nacional de Parques y Recreación de los Estados Unidos. Señoras y señores, ladies and gentlemen, Leon T. Andrews.
Buenas tardes. Hola. It's so wonderful to be with you today on behalf of the National Recreation and Parks Association as chair of the board. I've been having such a wonderful time here in Mexico, and this being the first annual International Congress of Urban Parks, I just want to celebrate the leadership, Luis and Christina, who have been amazing in hosting us. Thank you so much for hosting us. My wife has been able to join us as well. I wanted to acknowledge her, Dr. Christine Andrews, who's here in the audience. Thank you for being here. I will be going back to the United States, just sharing just how exciting I am about where this International Congress is going. As you are launching this, your first inaugural Congress, how we will be sharing with our professional advocates and just the connection and partnership opportunities that we have together. And so NRPA has been around since 1965, August 14th, 1965. It was a combination of 5 organizations that came together to create NRPA. It was the National Recreation Association. It was our American Institute for Park Executives, our American Recreation Society, our National Conference of State Parks, and our American Association of Parks and Zoological Parks and Aquariums. And so in the past 53 years, the organization has evolved tremendously. Our mission as an organization is to really focus on creating access to great parks for everyone. We believe everyone in the United States should have access to great parks. And our vision is really how do we design that around 3 pillars: health and wellness, conservation, and social equity. So I'd like to play just a short video to really describe what those pillars are as we talk about our investment and a priority.
I know growing up, I love going to my neighborhood park, especially for those of us who didn't grow up with a lot of money and you couldn't afford a lot of the specialty activities. Having something like a park that anybody could go into, and whether it's take a walk or play a game of tag, if your local park had a pool and you could swim, you know, there was just so many different things that offer such a wide variety of services to everyone.
I know I'm pretty old for this, but I like the splash plays, especially with my brother and my friends.
I like to bring him because I like to get him away from playing video games so much.
NRPA came together in 1965. The association was really founded on the principle that there needed to be a place where everybody could play.
We're not just providing playgrounds or places to play or a swimming lesson or a class. We're making a difference in the lives of a generation and impacting communities everywhere we are.
So our pillars were really the main focus that started this foundation.
These 3 pillars, health and wellness, conservation, social equity, are a constant reminder to agencies to look at a balance in what they offer.
Social equity, I think, is the pillar that resonates most with me and I think a lot of other people. And I think the reason for that is, you know, public open spaces is one of the last or only place, really, where people of all walks of life can come together and they're on equal footing.
We look at an increasingly diverse and growing country. Our demographics are changing. As agencies focus on social equity, it's this diversity that's going to make us richer as a profession and impact even more lives as we go forward.
The health and wellness pillar, that's been kind of our mantra from day one.
We've always thought of parks and recreation as kind of a key to health and wellness.
Having parks increases the quality of my life by a great measure.
The third pillar is conservation. We recognize that parks, open space, that we have to conserve it, and we also have to introduce people to the love of nature.
We have to make sure that we're playing a key role, not just in maintaining what we have, but in rebuilding what we've had that maybe we have lost, and then most importantly in educating our youth and our communities around why this is important.
The children who will take over the stewardship of the parks and of the earth need to understand the full value of what parks create.
Centers that just does baseball and football. We are really social service centers where we're providing cooking and nutrition, physical education, where we are providing after-school daycare. We are providing the mentorship that they may not get at home. So one of the things that NRPA looks at is how do we bring those services or those assets to underserved communities. This organization has grown and gotten stronger. We need to have the courage to try new thinking, to try new ways of doing things, and not see it as we're abandoning the old ways, but see it as we are innovators in our own right. And that's what's going to bring us the next 50 years of success.
So just a little bit of a clip that kind of really captures NRPA's investment in all three of our pillars, our health and wellness, our conservation, as well as our social equity work. As an association, we serve over 60,000 members across the country, both professionals as well as advocates. And so in our work, what we focus on in terms of how we service our members is really providing advocacy at a federal level. So literally in a DC level, how do we advocate for policies and legislation? But we also provide accreditation, whether it's through our university accreditation, our political certifications, as well as our research and technical assistance. And we do a number of things to really just kind of increase public awareness. And so in order to do this work, we invest in a lot of different programs. Our programs range. I want to highlight just three for you to kind of give you a sense of what the programs are that we do through NRPA. The first is our commitment to health. It's been around for the last 4 years. Our goal here is to ensure that children everywhere have access to healthy foods, physical activity opportunities through out-of-school time, through after-school programs. And in the last 4 years, the campaign has been implemented by over 1,600 parks and rec agencies and has served over 300,000 children through those programs. So commitment to health is kind of one program that we do. The second is our Parks for Inclusion, which is a formal pledge that NRPA has made in partnership with the Partnership for Inclusive Health's commitment to their inclusion for their campaign. And so we have been very intentional through NRPA to make sure that inclusion is a part of everything we do through our investments in our programs and through the organization. And then lastly, our 10-minute walk has also been a partnership with the Trust for Public Land. It has, as well as the Urban Land Institute, and that initiative is committed to every child being able to have access to a park within 10 minutes. And so each of those programs for us is just a sample for how we think the investment needs to be made as you're measuring impact. not just providing programs, but how do we know you're making a difference? How do we know that we're touching the children and the families in our cities across our country? And so looking at just the last year, 2017, over 1.5 million people in our country have benefited through NRPA programs. And so that has included the 17 million healthy meals and snacks served to children, over 422,000 people who have increased access to physical activity, as well as 59,000 people who have been connected to nature. That's important to me. I've been on the board for NRPA and now serving as chair for the last year. And so for us, we really as an association want to make sure that we are knowing that our dollars are yielding impacts in the work that we do. Because the question that we get often is the larger question of how do we know parks are important? Why invest in parks? Why, as cities are making decisions, how do we know that the decision between parks or police or fire or other services that cities offer, why do we know that cities need to be putting their dollars towards parks and recreation? And so being able to make the case has been so important in the work that we do. And we know, for those in this room and around the country in the United States, know that parks serve as an important cornerstone to communities. Places for connecting to families, having fun, healthy physical activity, all the things that we're hearing about here at the conference. And we also know from the survey that we have recently completed that the majority of Americans believe that parks and recreation provide an important service that's comparable to fire, to parks, to schools, transportation, to the police. And at the same time, we also know that the majority of Americans also see the value of a parks and rec space as they're looking to move to a particular neighborhood. And so there are lots of benefits for us to be able to talk about, and I think this conference continues to lift that up. There are the health and wellness benefits. We know that as we talk about childhood obesity, and we know that health and wellness benefits through physical activity, lots of studies since 2000 where we've seen those health and wellness benefits. And so we talk about the health and wellness benefits. We also talk about the conservation benefits, where parks serve as access to healthy ecosystems, maintaining those healthy ecosystems through providing clean water and clean air and enabling conservation of natural resources. So we talk about parks in that space, which we think are important. And then we also, I think, through this conference, we hear about the social equity benefits, where all you've been hearing through this conference about places of convening spaces. People come together to connect with each other, and family and friends is just a space for hosting their wonderful memories. And even in some spaces, measuring when it's well managed, decreases in crime and other detrimental activities. And then we also know the economic benefits for parks and recreation, where we know through a recent study through NRPA and in partnership with George Mason University that the operations and capital spending for local parks generates more than $154 billion in economic activity and supports more than 1.1 million jobs. So all of these, I think, affirms, the value of parks. But also in that space, I think the larger question for us and for me in the work that I do as chair for the organization is how are we also acknowledging the relevance of parks? How are we empowering parks to not just talk about the wonderful benefits that it currently serves, but also recognizing the reality of parks in our urban cities, in our urban communities. And so it's within that contrast that I think it's important to acknowledge the challenges we face. And so I want to play just a quick clip because for me, as we are naming the challenge, it's also important to really visualize what we're talking about in the United States.
I need everybody from the ages of 13 to 24 to stand up. I'm going to be real honest with you all because, see, we real talking up in here because Duke is real laying right in front of us.
A man was murdered overnight on Chicago's South Side. Police say it happened execution style.
I'm fed up.
124 people have been killed.
Each and every one of you all can be Duke right here.
There are 3 bullet holes in his home fired by
we got a responsibility to bring up our community to be vibrant.
Died last Friday, shot in the back as he tried to shoot.
My brothers, cease the fire, call the truth.
The violence interrupters had one goal in mind: save a life. And we need people to step up to this table and go over and beyond.
Man, we got over 500 years of prison time at this table. That's a lot of wisdom.
If I fall short.
Half of my life, I was in prison. That's why I do what I do now. I think I just stay busy, just try to forget about some of the things that I've done.
If your expectations.
I used to be in jails, kicking off rides and just gangbanging.
Let's just correct this. Let's just be a family.
There's always tomorrow.
Amina Matthews' father was one of the biggest gang leaders in the history of Chicago. She gets in where a lot of guys can't get in.
Schools, churches, your mama's house, your cars, those are safe zones.
Hang in there, baby. Sooner or later, I'll get it.
How can you help me? Right now. How can you help me?
Please don't give up on me.
And I thank God that you have changed your life, but you just don't know what they have did to me and my kids. I deal with this every day of my life.
I know it's late.
Can't know anybody come in and tell a guy to put his gun down. We've been taught violence. Violence is learned behavior.
If they have a strong person that's lived that life, I think they could be saved.
Whatever you do, we're gonna make it. We'll make it.
Do you want to be loved? Absolutely. Do you deserve to be loved? No. Absolutely.
We're sick and tired of our babies being killed. We can't be quiet no more.
We still look out for one another. To me, it's like there's still some hope left.
Don't give up on me.
So that clip was a 2-minute clip of just kind of a reality check as I talk about the importance of parks and all of its benefits and all of the work that we're doing in the United States. Because in that context, it's important to acknowledge the rising tensions we see in our country for those that have been following. And so we know that those are realities as we're talking about the roles that NRPA, the National Recreation and Parks Association, can play. How are we responding to that as we talk about the values of parks and all of the benefits that I listed before, from the health and wellness to the conservation to the social equity? And so this quote from Maya Angelou, the late Maya Angelou, was really important to me as I think about my role as chair for NRPA and the role that I have at the National League of Cities. It says, prejudice is a burden that confuses the past, it threatens the future, and renders our future inaccessible. And so what we have realized in the work, that we can't take on this work without being able to be very intentional about acknowledging issues of inequity. Our inability to do that will allow us to come back to this conversation over and over again, not really truly talking about the work that really needs to be impacted in these urban communities. And so in that context, NRPA and the work that we do is trying to look at what roles parks can play to prevent further conflict. What's the benefits in recognizing, with everything we're seeing across the United States, about the role of parks in that space? And so in my day job, I work at the National League of Cities. So I'm the director there and work with mayors and city council members across the country. And we support elected officials in their efforts to strengthen their capacity to eliminate racial disparities, to address racial healing, and also to build more equitable communities. It's called REAL, which stands for Race, Equity, and Leadership. And so in doing that in our work, it also requires us to be very intentional and really talking about what we mean and looking at the data. We think that is critical in recognizing that our ability to be intentional about the work is critical. And so when we look at the data from infant mortality to infant mortality to life expectancy, race is the strongest predictor in the United States of one's success. And so to talk about equity without that context, it's almost like we are going back to what Maya Angelou said, our inability to be able to address it in a very explicit way. And so that's been part of our work as we are taking on this work. And so another really short clip from The first real talk that we had 3 years ago when we launched this in the United States with mayors and with city leaders across the country that really talked about the challenges that are in front of us in doing this work. So I'll play another really short clip to give you more context.
Tim, you have written a book about this subject from a different perspective. What are your thoughts, opening thoughts about where we are in America right now?
Well, in the 3 minutes, 3 to 5 that we've been given, I'll do my best to answer it. And I know we're going to get deeper into this conversation as we go, so I'll save some of what I want to talk about for that. But I really appreciate the way that you framed the discussion at the outset, because at least on 2 occasions I heard you reference something that we really don't do very much in this country, and that is you reference systemic racism, and you referred to it in that way. And I think that's important. In fact, it's critical, not just for the National League of Cities effort, but for our conversation as a country, because too often what we do, and I think we all know this, is we look at racism as that thing that happened in Charleston. That is to say, and when I say that thing that happened, I'm not talking about the generations of institutional racism. I'm talking about the thing that happened this summer. We look at that as racism. We say, well, Dylan Roof walks into a church and massacres 9 people, and the city comes together, and the state comes together, and the country grieves, and that's racism. And then we sort of wash our hands of it because we say, well, thankfully, that doesn't happen every week. That doesn't happen all the time. That's an anomaly. But we have to be prepared to look at racism as something that's far deeper than that, and not about bigotry, not about overt hatred, and not just about that type of random retail violence, because that's retail violence. We got wholesale violence. And by that, I mean, if you're going to understand what happened in Baltimore in the last 6 months, you cannot start with Freddie Gray, and you cannot start even with the police department in Baltimore. You have to start with the fact that that is a community that was wrecked by so-called urban renewal. That was violence. When they come in and they put the interstate through your community and they knock down your business and they knock down your apartments and they make folks huddle into small crowded housing and they essentially lock them in a holding pen. I mean, we talk about housing and education. We talk about neighborhoods as if it's not about racism. We act like folks just ended up where they ended up. But let's be clear, this thing that we in this country call the ghetto, that was created. And it wasn't created by black people, and it wasn't created by poor people. It was created by folks who were usually not black and definitely not poor as a holding pen for the people they didn't want to live amongst them. So we have to be prepared to call that violence. If you don't call zoning laws and redlining violence, even though it does violence, and you don't call it racism, then how are we going to solve that? So I want us to frame this conversation the way that you've done it. And I think that's where we are as a country. We're still stuck in this mode of describing racism as this interpersonal thing rather than understanding it structurally and institutionally. And I think until we get to that place where we can talk about not just that individual cop who does something wrong in the community, which we can see plenty of examples of that, but until we deal with the mentality that says that spatial isolation, segregation, residential isolation, black and brown kids going to schools 12 times more likely to be places of concentrated poverty. That's not an accident. People didn't choose that. And so I think that's where we need to go, is to frame the conversation in a way that reminds us that we're talking about systemic and structural violence. And we can't just talk about the sort of retail level stuff, as important as that is, and as horrific as a hate crime is. To be really honest, at the risk of being hyperbolic, aspects of this country's history have been an intergenerational hate crime against certain people. And that's just the truth. We don't like to use language like that. Sounds un-American, unpatriotic, whatever kind of terminology we use, but that's real. And unless we're prepared to do it that way and have that conversation that way, I'm afraid we'll keep spinning our wheels, coming back, having the same conversations over and over and over again. The reason that low-income black folks were the ones hit hardest in New Orleans was not an accident. And what was stunning to me about it, and I lived there for 10 years, the only people that were shocked by what happened, for the most part, were white folks. Black folks weren't shocked that they got uprooted. They weren't shocked that they got left behind and forgotten. That was the history of that community, right? Urban renewal did that. Interstate highway construction right through the Treme, the oldest free black neighborhood in this country, did that. And so it was just same thing, different day. A little bit more extreme, and the cameras were on, and they made movies about it. But it was the same stuff that had always been happening. So we have to go back to that systemic understanding, which is something I think the movement historically knew, but most of our leaders have sometimes forgotten.
Wow. So we're going to have a real conversation today, aren't we? I think I'm ready.
So I want to actually apologize to the translators because I realized as Tim was talking, and I've been listening as they've been translating for me, they probably were doing an incredible job translating everything Tim said because he was speaking really, really fast. So thank you to the translators. Can we give them a big round of applause because they've been doing great throughout the whole conference. But I wanted to show that clip, obviously, because what Tim said there really captures the work about how do we put what he says into context of talking about parks. Some of you have seen slides like these. This understanding the definitions is important. I'm obviously not going to spend time going into a whole lot of depth in the context of understanding terminology, but I love this diagram because it really captures the differences between equality and equity. Equality is on the left-hand side of three people trying to watch a football game, and they are given each of them a box. All three of them don't need the box if the goal is for them to watch the football game behind the fence. The guy on the left doesn't need a box. The young lady in the middle may need one box, but the person on the right can't do anything with that box, right? And so equity, the work we talk about as we think about parks and services in our communities, are what are we thinking about from an equitable standpoint in providing what people need? If the goal here, in this case, is for them to watch the game from behind the fence. And the reason why I emphasize the goal is for them to watch from behind the fence is because people in this room and others will say, well, why are they behind the fence? How come they're not sitting in the stands? How come they don't own the team? How come they're not playing in the game, right? So we start to change the meaning of our goals, but in order to do work on an equity level, we have to be clear about our goals. In this case, they're behind the fence and they're trying to watch the football game from behind the fence, and we're trying to figure out what they need. Equity is about giving them what they need, not giving everyone the same thing. That's really important in the work that we do, right? And also recognizing as we do the work in the United States across cities, there are very different entry points in how we work with parks and how we work with cities. Some cities are being very intentional about creating racial equity plans. Some of them are approaching it from special populations, from boys and men of color, or women and girls, or immigrants, or LGBTQ, or religiously persecuted. So we find different entry points or different issues, from transportation issues or health issues or workforce development, and sometimes just creating space for a conversation, connecting with your community, understanding people who live in your community and what they need. How do you create that space for conversations? So all serve as entry points into the work as we talk about the benefits and values of parks and recreation that I think is important. You can't expect everyone it's not one size that fits all. You need to figure out how you're meeting cities and working with parks where they are. And at the same time, communicating the benefits. And I know in this country, we talked about it throughout the conference, there are questions about the credibility, if you will, of local government, how well local government is willing to invest in this work. And for us in the United States, similar challenges in the sense of will local government see the value of parks and rec over other things? And so how do we talk to our mayors and how do we talk to our decision makers? It's always important to be able to communicate this bottom line that it's not just the moral thing to do, it's good governance. To be able to take on these issues, your cities will be more prosperous, your cities will be safer, your cities will be healthier, you have more accountable government. Things that most elected officials want to be able to talk about. So how are you communicating this work in the lens that allows them to listen and hear is also so important in the work that we do. And so all of that for me has served as the foundation of my role as chair and how that shows up in the work that we do. And so I want to highlight one example of our work in New Orleans. When I became chair of the organization last November, we were in New Orleans and highlighted some of the work that we did there. So I wanted to be able to show that for you.
August 2005, the Gulf Coast was a victim to one of the deadliest storms to ever hit our country. the city of New Orleans was caught in the grasp of this storm. Hurricane Katrina ravaged this city. Floodwaters poured into eastern New Orleans, the lower 9th Ward, and St. Bernard's Parish, topping 20 feet, putting 80% of the city underwater. 800,000 housing units were destroyed or damaged, leaving over 400,000 people homeless. And nearly 2,000 people died.
The importance of the Lehman Park in the Lafitte Greenway is pretty much like having a sacred space in the city. The Treme neighborhood, all of that is part of the original historical part of the city of New Orleans.
So this was a really bustling neighborhood that had a lot of community life, and it was thriving, a lot of businesses. And then Katrina came and just really wiped that out. So you had generations of people that could not come back to that area.
Access to recreational opportunities and green space was virtually non-existent.
When Hurricane Katrina tore through our city, New Orleans was brought to her knees. The Lafitte neighborhood felt the full wrath of Hurricane Katrina, but in the past 12 years, this city has stood back up and has become a model for resilience.
This park is really nestled into that community. It's going to be something that this community needs. It needs some heart back. I mean, it's suffered a great deal, and we're just so pleased that this build can be a part of that rejuvenation, if you will, of this very important and historic neighborhood.
The Parks Build Community Project has been this great mechanism that has been able to bring the community together.
I mean, parks are places where kids learn the values of life. That's the entire whole point of NORD. So every one of these kids can have a great, safe place to play and learn the lessons of how to win, how to lose with grace, with dignity, and become great citizens.
There's something for everyone to do out there, right? There's a place for young people to play basketball, little tiny kids to be on play equipment, and their parents can be right next door exercising.
It just gives young people the opportunity to explode and just run free. So it's amazing to have the park back in our community.
So we know that parks build community, and this is one way to kind of kick that off and to get people outside of their houses and get to know their neighbors and take care of each other. One of the great things about this project, it allows us to partner with lots of people and lots of organizations, and it's when everybody comes together for the greater good, and parks are that. It's for the public good, and no one really owns it. But NRPA feels very strongly about revitalizing these communities because we feel that everyone deserves a park.
I came to visit New Orleans last year and took a tour, and I've seen the devastation. We believe that by offering this amenity, we will help heal the community and bring it together.
Play is a great way to bring kids, families, and communities together and lets them develop socially, emotionally, and physically.
When we designed this play space, we specifically looked at the play events and the colors to really represent New Orleans and the surrounding community.
This project is another opportunity to enhance and improve recreation in the inner city area. Musco is pleased and proud to be a part of this project and future projects.
For us to be able to come out to a place like this and help people play where maybe they didn't have opportunities to do so before just makes us feel absolutely wonderful. And coming out today and seeing everybody the way they're playing is really exciting.
Yeah, I call it a bit of magic. Really never thought about it, but if I had to, it's a bit of magic. It has been a bit of magic watching this unfold.
So that's the work that we are on. That's the journey we're on. As we don't feel as an organization we're there yet. We are continuing to challenge ourselves as we are looking at the issues that impact urban communities across the United States. This example of New Orleans is just, for me, a small kind of window, look into the window of the work as you were listening to what Tim Wise says as we are talking about these larger issues. And so we hope that you will continue to join us, engage with us. Our annual conference will be this fall in Indianapolis in September 25th through the 27th. Over 8,000 park professionals and advocates come together for over those few days. It's the largest convening of all park professionals in the United States. So we want to welcome you to join us in September if you are available to join us, and really do appreciate, again, thank you so much to all of those that have pulled together such a wonderful conference. I can't tell you how much fun we've been having over the last couple of days. And so I want to end just with an invitation video to join us in Indianapolis, but thank you so much for your time.